I agree with what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. Stop agreeing with yourself. Stop agreeing with yourself. Hello, and welcome to Glass Half Full Reviews, where our motto is, Eating gives you wrinkles. And today, I will be reviewing Darren Aronofsky's Noah. Now, Darren Aronofsky is known for some very interesting films. You had Pi, which was the sort of neo-mystical, kabbalist, bizarre math fantasy. Requiem for a Dream, which was another sort of bizarre fantasy, except this one was more about how horrible it might be to take drugs and end up badly. There was, of course, The Fountain, his truly avant-garde piece about the acceptance of death in a very interestingly messed up narrative structure. Then there was his most mainstream movie, The Wrestler, which had about the most logical narrative arc I can imagine. And I'm not going to say that it made me cry at the end, because I'm not admitting that ever again. And then, of course, there was his most successful movie, The Black Swan, which was very similar to The Wrestler in a lot of respects. It had a very similar parallel arc. And, of course, that one was about obsession and blah, blah, blah. The different masks we wear and the yin and the yang and the two different sides. But that's a review of The Black Swan, so I'm not going to really get into that one. The important thing is that I'm a fan of Aronofsky in general. He's probably one of my most favorite of directors, because he takes chances, he tries weird things. Does it always work? No. But he's always trying, he's always pushing, he's always doing something interesting. And too often I see movies and they're just fun. They're average, they are okay, they're pleasant, but they're not interesting. And one thing you can say about Aronofsky's films is they're always interesting. So Noah. Noah, of course, is based off of a biblical story. Now, if you're a believer, you'll say, okay, well, it's either a literal or a metaphorical story. And if you're a non-believer, you'll say, oh, it's just a legend, it's a fictional myth. Either way, it doesn't matter. Aronofsky, of course, is of the belief that it was a fictional myth. And I think that you could still say that you could learn lessons from that. It certainly seems to me that that was his argument. In general, this movie is astounding. There is so much going on. There are so many ideas permeating here. It's hard to really keep track of everything. In fact, I would say that's the only real failure of the movie. There's just too much going on. Now, that being said, let's start from the beginning. In the beginning, the world was created. After a bunch of stuff, Adam and Eve, the snake, eventually you had Cain killing Abel, and then Noah. And as a lot of people know, there's this whole story about how Noah is basically the one who has to say, okay, God told me I have to somehow build this ark because I have to rescue the animals and also myself. But it's not so simple. In this movie, they take a very different angle on things. Instead of a direct conversation, Noah has these visions from God that he has to interpret. And that brings one of the very interesting themes of the movie, which is the difficulty of belief in general. How do you interpret what you think is the right thing to do, even when it hurts you? Even when you think it might be wrong from a different perspective? How do you know what the right thing to do is? Now, Russell Crowe stars as Noah, and he's just awesome. There's no question this is his movie. I have never seen something this good. A close second would probably be LA Confidential, which is probably the first film I ever saw him in, other than that one movie that I forget the name of with Denzel Washington that was sort of like where he played a computer, and it wasn't that good. It was sort of a early 90s or mid-90s silly sci-fi movie. I can get into that. He played Sid 6.9. In this film, we have Jennifer Connelly playing Noah's wife, Naama, who is in Requiem for a Dream as well, by which I mean Jennifer Connelly and not Noah's wife. Noah has 3 sons. They grow up to a point. Emma Watson plays an orphan girl that they find and raise as one of their own. And Ray Winstone plays Tubal-Cain, a descendant of Cain who is essentially the leader of all the other men. The descendants of Cain and the descendants of Shem are the only 2 lines, but Noah and his family are the only ones left of the good people, and Tubal-Cain leads everyone else. Now, one of the interesting things that they talk about in this movie is how basically humans had a chance to do stuff with the Earth and they screwed it up. They just overused and destroyed. Now, you might want to say that there's a bit of an environmental message here, and that is 100% true. But, that being said, it's nothing that radical. It's really along the lines of, hey, yeah, we can use the Earth, just don't screw it up for everyone in the future. I really don't feel like that's that controversial, but I can understand why some people who are really stridently anti-planet Earth might just say, nope, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to push an agenda. You want me to buy solar cars. And, the solar lobby is really strong. So I can understand why you might have that kind of objection. The movie can be intense at times. It can be difficult to watch. It's nothing close to the level of difficulty from, say, Requiem for a Dream, but it gets very psychologically intense at times as Noah is trying to figure out what he can do. He's trying to make these tough decisions that aren't black and white. How do you decide? And in the end, we see maybe Noah isn't necessarily making all the right moves. Maybe he isn't deciding everything for himself. The movie finds time to introduce other subplots as well. You may have heard about these ideas of these fallen angels that are involved. I don't want to give that away, at least not in this spoiler-free review. But for me, it worked. I can understand again why some people might find it a little difficult at times to take in, might remove them from the flow of the movie, because there's a bit of a stylistic difference at times. That being said, I think it worked. Alright, it's time for our 5-point breakdown.
5-point breakdown.
Number 1, the acting. Now, this is a movie filled with acting. I've already said Russell Crowe is amazing, no question about that. Jennifer Connelly, very good. Maybe 1 or 2 scenes where it was a little histrionic, but in general, excellent. Emma Watson, best I've ever seen from her. She was pretty good in last year's The Bling Ring, but this is a standout performance. Anthony Hopkins is pretty good as Methuselah, playing Noah's great-grandfather? No, grandfather. In very good old age makeup. He looks good, and he acts like an old, wise, mysterious man. I found Ray Winstone's performance probably to be the weakest in the movie, as the sort of villain character that's both right and wrong at times, but is definitely more of a villain in simplistic terms, and sometimes I found his performance a little hammy. And of course, Logan Lerman, who played Ham, one of Noah's sons, he does a very good job as well. Now, what about the story? Now, of course, the story is not original per se, but a lot of original elements, a lot of interpretive elements come together to make it actually a pretty original, refreshing take on this story, taking values and morals that may seem simple and making it much more difficult to think about. Really, this is a movie that will make you think. So if you don't like that, maybe don't see it. That being said, that moves me to my next point. Number 3, the look. This movie looks amazing. And with the exception of, I would say, 2 particular points that I remember the CGI being a little unrealistic, I loved the look of this film. There are 2 sequences in particular, and I don't want to just say what it was, but I will say it had something to do with Noah telling a story. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful sequence. It was kind of awe-inspiring to see a master of visual artistry just put this sequence together. It just took your breath away. Number 4, the feel. How do I feel after watching this movie? I was really mixed right after this movie. I felt like, I like it, but I don't know how much I like it. But here's the thing. The more I've thought about it, the more I've analyzed it, the more I've gone over in my head, the more I've talked about it with people, the better I've liked it. That is a sign of a quality movie. That is a sign of a movie that feels good. It makes you feel invested. It makes you wonder. It makes you ponder existence. That's a lot of stuff for one movie. And finally, number 5, does it matter? Well, I've talked a little bit about how interesting the morals and the lessons of the story is and how complicated it gets. I would say this movie matters in a very interesting way. Maybe we'll get decent biblical stories from this. There's supposedly a Moses movie coming out later this year with Christian Bale, though I'll check up on that. As for now, I would say my final summation of Noah. If you like Aronofsky's movies, I think you will definitely like this. It's kind of like an epic fantasy that happens to be based on biblical ideas, but has some serious depth in there too. So my final ranking is, I really like this movie, and I hope you would too, but I'll understand if you don't. Thanks for stopping by.